They've got a picture that they drew and they can't wait to show it. And because they're your kids, it's wonderful art. And you love it, and it's just so awesome because they're expressing their personality, how they see the world. But if you take a look at this cave art here as well, 30,000 years ago, it's pretty impressive artwork there. And it's even more impressive if you can actually see what they're doing. And a lot of art is like that, isn't it? If you can see what they're actually doing with the art, it's like, oh wow, that's pretty amazing. Like the way that you can see how Van Gogh is able to give the impression of motion with his little swirls and things like this. Well, in this painting here as well, they've got been giving an impression of motion as well. Now, if you see the woolly rhino there, it's got several horns there. And it might look like, oh, I'm just going to draw it here. No, I'll draw it here instead. No, I'll draw it here. But what they're actually doing there, if you can imagine what it would have been like if you were in this cave and it was lit by firelight and the firelight is flickering, then what you would see is that as the firelight flickers, first it will catch one horn, then another horn, then another horn, then another horn. And it will give the impression that this woolly rhino is moving in motion. 30,000 years ago, humans were creating art that's sort of like this flip book, which you did. Do you ever do this in the corner of your book? You draw these little pictures and you make a little animated cartoon. You can flip through. Yeah, you're laughing. I know you've done it plenty then. You go through there and you can see a little cartoon happen. That's what they were doing on a cave wall. Pretty amazing, huh? And if you know, and you created that little flipbook animation like that, why did you do that? You did it because it was fun. Chesterton was right. The artist is drawing something that's fun and creating something also that stirs up imagination in people that see it. So when people see it, they go, wow, that's cool, that's fun. And it's not just visual art that we can find as we look at the prehistory either. When we take a look at prehistory, so 30,000 years ago we have this, we don't have any writing about what they did or why or things like that, but we have other artefacts. And when you take a look at some of the earliest artefacts we have are things like pipes or flutes. They were making music. And so they had found a way to create these different types of art, and they were doing it right from the earliest times of humanity. The earliest evidence that we have of humans is of humans creating art. Is it not moving? Do we need to point it in a different direction? Here we go. Thank you at the back there. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, spoke of the three transcendentals: truth, goodness and beauty. They're called transcendentals because they're supposed to transcend all different human cultures. In other words, there's a belief that every culture throughout time and in every place across the whole earth has recognised these things as self-evident value. They're true, and they're not true because of anything. They are just things that are, and that things that we recognise as humans and appreciate. We recognise and appreciate truth and goodness and beauty. So outside of the Bible, human wisdom has recognised that there is something universal about our appreciation of beauty and therefore of art. We seem to be hardwired in some way to recognise and value these things. But the question remains, is this all just worldly vanity? Is art of any lasting spiritual value at all? Should we as Christians be appreciating art or making art? Is that something that matters to us in our Christian lives and Christian calling? And if so, what kingdom purpose is there in this? And to answer these questions, we're going to look at a few things. First, I'm going to take us to the first time that the Bible mentions God filling someone with his Spirit. I'm going to go back to creation to consider what it means to be made in the image of God. And also going to have a look at how one writer and thinker considered the place of art in God's kingdom. And then I'm going to take a look at what this means for us as Christians wanting to glorify God. So in the passage we read this morning in Exodus chapter 31, it said, "Then God said to Moses, 'See, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of crafts.'" God filled Bezalel with his Spirit in Exodus 31. This was the very first mention of God filling a person with his Spirit. The very first. And the purpose of it was to create works of art for God. I want you to stop and think about the significance of this. Think about the very first time in Scripture we find that God has filled someone with his Spirit, and you think about all of the different possible purposes or reasons there could be. It wasn't a king going out into battle. It wasn't even a prophet coming and bringing God's word to the people. It was an artist that God chose for being the first person that he describes as being filled with the Spirit. This is part of the instructions that God is giving to Moses for the people of Israel as they're going to become their own nation, a nation saved by God from slavery and consecrated to worshipping God as a new nation. And God is giving instructions for the making of the tabernacle, which is in effect a mobile temple, and of the artifacts of the temple, of this temple, and for the clothing of the priests. And he specifically makes sure that through the filling of the Spirit and of all wisdom, understanding, knowledge and skill, that all of these things be made for the purpose of worship. And when you take a look there and it says it filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge and with all kinds of skill. I think the way that we are to read these is that the wisdom, the understanding, the knowledge of all kinds of skills are ways of elaborating on what that filling of the Spirit means for Bezalel. Bezalel and his assistant Aholiab would have made many different pieces of art. They would have made the tabernacle curtain, which was embroidered with cherubim, and the Ark of the Covenant, which had gold-lacquered cherubim on it. And when you think of cherubim, please don't think of little babies with wings, which was an invention of Renaissance art. If you must put an image of your head, think of something more like a Babylonian sphinx there, like the one on the left. And when you think of what Bezalel and Aholiab are empowered by God's Spirit to do, there was all different kinds of art. They were doing visual art like embroidery. They were doing fashion design. They were making clothes for the priests. It was fashion design. They were doing architectural art. They were doing sculpture. They were doing jewellery. There was stuff there about the setting of precious stones. They were doing all different kinds of art. And so all of these different kinds of art, God has filled them with his Spirit to create all of these different kinds of art. And these different forms of art are given the special honour of being created in this co-labouring with God's Spirit and incredibly skilled artists. We can also see through this how God recognises how objects of beauty affect humans. That when we are in the presence of beautiful things, we respond with a sense of awe that is not completely unlike how we approach God. Do you know what I'm talking about there? Have you ever seen something that just took your breath away? It could have been an amazing sunset. It could have been, an amazing landscape. Maybe you've been on a hike, you get to the top of a hill and you look out over there and it's just, wow. It could have been, looking in the face of one of your children when they're really young or something like that. It could be, and I remember this, my wedding day when my wife walked down the aisle, it was wow. And it wasn't just me. I heard the whole church was like, oh, as she walked in, because she was looking really stunning on that day. We respond to beauty in that way. That's how we respond to beauty. And that sense of awe is not completely different to how we are to approach God. And so God is using objects of beauty to help people get in the right spirit or mood to recognize the awesomeness of God. So if God is using art in this way, how can we say that art is simply worldly vanity? How can we not see how this is something good that God is a part of? But you might wonder then, should art then be limited only to Christian representation of art? Should it only be used in this sense to help Christians worship? Is that the only legitimate use of art? And this is where it helps for us to go back and consider God's creation of humans in the image of God and what that means. It's important to remember that creation was not an accident or a surprise for God. He created exactly what he intended to. Okay? This is really important here. God created exactly what he intended to, which includes creating us in his image exactly as he intended to. This means that he created the world, knowing that certain frequencies of sound would combine in harmonious ways to create chords and melodies and harmonies. It's not an accident. That was intended by God. It might have taken some time to discover that, but it was there. Bobby McFerrin, the singer of Don't Worry, Be Happy. You guys know that song? Don't worry, be happy. Yeah, that's right. So he was giving a talk at a conference one time. And to illustrate how universal this is, he got up front and he stood in a place and he hummed a note. And then he jumped to his left and he hummed a higher note. And he was getting people to hum along with him. So hum along with him. And back between two notes. And then he jumped to the third place. And everyone hummed the next note up on the scale. He didn't hum it. He didn't lead them for that one. They all knew where to go. There is something innate in us where we recognize how this works without actually being taught. We intuitively know how these sounds are and that they're harmonious. It's how God has created us. Music is hardwired into us. And more than that, God created these frequencies and he created us in a way that the chords, melodies, harmonies, and the tone and timbre of these sounds would have an emotional impact on us. That's not an accident. God created the world in such a way that music has an emotional impact on us. He created the world such that there are principles of symmetry, golden ratios, Fibonacci sequences, all of these things that are hardwired into so many aspects of creation. And again, he recognized that these patterns have an emotional impact on us. That art has an emotional impact on us, is hardwired into us, into creation. It's part of how God made the world, not by accident. This isn't just an accident that it just happened that way. God intended it that way. That art, all forms of art, including music, visual art, would have this emotional impact on us. And so, because of this as well, because we were created in the image of God, in the image of a creator God, we create. And so we create art. We write beautiful stories. And these stories carry us on an emotional journey. People have done studies into the effect on stories. They did a study at a university in the United States, and they set it up in that they invited people in, and they, with one group, they told them a story about someone who was suffering. And with another group, they just gave them the facts about these are the needs that there are in the community. And then they asked the people, everyone was given, I think, $20 to just for coming and doing this, as participating in the experiment. And at the end, they asked them if they'd donate some of their fee to this. Which group donated more? It was the people who heard the story. And so the stories had an emotional effect. We write beautiful stories. We paint beautiful pictures. We carve beautiful sculptures. We compose beautiful songs. And we do all of this because we are made in the image of God. Just like the cave painter that Cheston recognised, we do it for fun. We do it because it was beautiful, and we do it because we're made in the image of God. And we have an urge to create and to respond to beautiful things. The author J.R.R. Tolkien wrote a short story called Leaf by Niggle. He tells the story of an artist called Niggle who began working on his magnum opus, his great work, a painting of a tree. And as he worked on this painting of this tree, he laboured and laboured on a particular leaf that he was trying to get just right. He was trying to get it just how he had seen it in his mind, how he envisaged it. And he did this his whole life, working and working away at this, trying to get it just right. And then he died. And when he entered paradise, he saw the tree there in paradise that he had envisaged, with every leaf there perfect, just as he had envisaged it, including that leaf that he was working on. There was the art. That was how he tried to get it. The point that Tolkien was making was that we as humans are all sub-creators. Every great work of art that we see in the world existed in the mind of God before it existed on the canvas of the artist who made it. God created us so that we would create, so that we would fill the earth with the beauty that he intended. But because of our fallen nature, we never get it quite right, do we? We can't even draw a straight line, let alone get a picture to look exactly how we want it to. But we're called to subcreate. We're called to create part of God's vision. And for some of us, in terms of how we do that, how we create that representation of God's kingdom. Some of us will be in visual art. Some of us will be music. Some of it may be in how we organise things. That orchestrating of different things. Even like organising a church service, setting out the order of service and things like that. There's an art to that. And as we do that, whether it's here in church or whether it's outside in the rest of the week, as we let our creative the creative aspect of who we are be expressed. We are making God's kingdom visible to those around us as we reproduce God's kingdom through our art. We're making God's kingdom visible to those around us. God harnesses our creativity to display his attributes in the world. So as we let God work through us to create in the particular way that God has designed each of us, we actually let a little of God's glory shine into the world. Good art draws us to appreciate beauty, and a contemplation of beauty opens a door to consider questions. Have you noticed that really good art makes you stop and think? And as we stop and think, we open ourselves to the point where we can stop and think about ultimate questions. These questions of ultimate significance, what our place in the world is, how we relate to God. All good art draws us in and want to make us want to know more and understand more. It pulls questions out of us. Art can be a very powerful catalyst to bringing someone not only intellectually but emotionally to a place where the questions of God and our relationship to him become more real. It was no accident that God created us in this way. And it is no accident that he saw art and artistry as being so important for his work that he filled the artist with his Spirit. May we, in the way that God has made you, be artists for God, exhibiting our creativity in a way that lets the world see who God really is. Thank you.